Hello and welcome to the latest part in this series. This time we're going to look at adding support for debuggers to our language. This means that when you're editing the file in your IDE, such as VS Code, we're going to allow you to set a breakpoint and then run the program and actually step through it instruction by instruction. And at the same time, look at the current value of our variables. So we've got two variables, we've got the tape itself and we've got the data pointer which says where we are in the tape at the moment. In order to support debugging, there's a few jobs we need to do. We need to be able to configure where we're going to build in release or debug mode. So when we're in release mode, we do optimizations, which means it's not as easy to actually debug it. We need to add some debug attributes to the assembly itself, so we can tell that this assembly can be debugged. We need to generate a Pdb file with our variables in and our symbols. And finally, we need to add the sequence points. So if you think of sequence points, are all the places in the program where you can set a debug breakpoint. So for example, if we look at our IL generator, when we emit an instruction at the moment, we emit multiple IL codes. So this would only consist of a single sequence point, because you wouldn't want to be able to step through these individual commands. You want to step through this as a whole. Because this is quite a lot to do, I've decided to split this up into two videos. So in the first part, we'll do these 3 bits. And then in the second part, we'll add the sequence points, because we also have to go through and add location information to each of our instructions. So let's look at doing the command line at the moment. So what we're trying to support is normally when you go into our sample folder. So we did last time, we can do .NET build to build our code. What we'd like to be able to do is also pass in the configuration whether or not we're going to build the debug or the release settings, release mode. And you can either specify ---- configuration, or there's a shorthand which is just -C. So let's add that in to begin with. So that's going to be in our program. So at the moment we've forced release mode always to be true, so we want to make that optional. So if our argument starts with if our argument is -C, or its configuration, then we can say we're in release mode when the following argument is either release mode, and we want to make it case insensitive. So just ignore case. So -C release will put us into release mode. -C anything else will put us in debug mode. And so we can see what's going on, I think we should just print out down here which mode we're currently in. So if in release mode, and we're not in release mode, building in debug mode. So the next thing to do is change our build file to actually pass in this additional argument, so the -C or configuration. So before we create this directory.build targets, where we called our command, bf.exe, and what I've done here is I've added in our additional argument, so -C rather than writing out the full configuration, and this gets populated and passed through automatically from your .NET build command. So we can now try that now. If we now say it's now picked up, we're building in release mode, and we do it a second time in debug, it's building in debug mode. So that's working well. So the next thing we want to do is, I think we run ILSpy. Let's remove all our old versions. Okay, and then if we just look at the one we just created, so we compiled into yes, the debug we want to look at. So let's look at that DLL we just generated. So as you can see, we don't have any much metadata or attributes at the moment. So what we need to do is add in the assembly level attribute to say this is a debuggable assembly. So that's going to be part of our IL generator, and we can remit that information just before we write the file. So down here, the attribute we want to add is system.diagnostics.debuggable attribute, and we need to call the constructor on that one, which takes the 2 Boolean arguments in. So that's what we're going to try and add to our assembly. So system.diagnostics.debuggable attribute, if we press F2, F1, then we'll do that. Is that F12? That's what we want. We can see that actually sits in the system runtime DLL, so we need to import that DLL first of all. So we can do that at the top here. In the same way as we loaded system.console, we're now going to load the runtime. And then we need to find our type, that's our type within that assembly. So we need to read in the assembly first of all. And then we can now find our type in there. And we can just call that debuggable attribute type. So now we got the type. So the method we need to find is the constructor, and we need the overload that takes in the 2 booleans. So it's going to be on there, and constructor is CTOR, and we need to match the overload that has 2 Boolean parameters. And that's a method or a reference. Okay. And the reason it's not compiling at the moment is we don't have an overload of find method that takes in 2 parameter types, so we just need to create another copy which does that. So now 2 parameters. Okay, that should do for a moment. So we've loaded in our assembly, system.runtime. We found our type, system.diagnostic.debuggable attribute. We then found the constructor on the type, which takes the overload of the 2 booleans, which is now in here. So now we can actually add that to our assembly in here. So what I shall do is I shall take the code from my notes, so I don't have to remember it. So this is where we're creating our new custom attribute, and then we call the constructor with true for both our arguments, and then we add that to our assembly. However, we don't want to do that if we're in release mode. We only want to do that if we're in debug mode. It's built. So we're building our file in debug mode. Refresh it in here. And as you can see, we've now picked up our attribute. So we've done that. So now we can generate the Pdb file with our variables in. So the thing to note is we're not generating any Pdb files at all at the moment. And the 2 variables we want to add are tape and pointer. So what we need to do is just pull these variable definitions out into local variables ourselves. So again, I shall take the code from my notes. So here that we're saying the variables we're interested in actually make available, which is our tape and data pointer, and the scope is the entire program because we only have one method. So these variables are available from everywhere. So now we can generate the PDB file itself. And first of all, we need to tell it the name of the file. So it's going to be the DLL or exe we're generating at the moment, but we'll switch it to the extension. So we create that as a stream. And then we call the overload of assembly.write, which allows us to pass in some additional parameters. And those parameters are we want to write our symbols out and the format to write them in. If we're not in release mode, sorry, if we're not in debug mode, then we just write it out as we did before. And because it's a bit confusing that, we shall invert that statement. So if we're in release mode, we just write out the assembly. If we're in debug mode, we add our attribute, we tell it which variables we're interested in, and then we write out the PDB file. So let's try that. So now we can see we've got a PDB file, and we go back to ILSpy and reload that. We've now picked up this metadata, including the variables we're interested in. So that's the next part.